Everyone in the courtroom thought Daniel Mercer was the winner. He sat back in his tailored navy suit, smirking like a man who had already buried his wife before the judge even spoke. To him, Claire was just the quiet woman who had spent 12 years standing beside him at business dinners, smiling politely while he took credit for every deal, every investment, every success. She was the woman he called lucky for marrying him, the woman he told his friends would leave with nothing but memories once the divorce was finished. What Daniel didn't know was that Claire had been silent for a reason. For years, while he mocked her lack of ambition, she had been building something far bigger than his ego could imagine. Under a name no one connected to her, Claire owned the private bank that held every loan Daniel had begged for to keep his collapsing company alive. Every debt, every overdue payment, every desperate extension he thought he had negotiated with strangers had passed across her desk. And on the day of their divorce hearing, Daniel made his final mistake. In front of the judge, lawyers, reporters, and half the city's business elite, he laughed at her. He called her financially helpless. He said she wouldn't understand corporate assets, loan structures, or the value of his company. Then he leaned toward her and whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, "You should have stayed grateful." Claire didn't cry. She didn't argue. She simply opened a thin black folder and handed one document to her attorney. Within minutes, Daniel's smile began to disappear. The bank was calling in his debts. His company had defaulted. And because of a clause Daniel never bothered to read, his shares were now eligible for court-supervised acquisition. Then came the sentence that froze the room. Claire Mercer was not asking for alimony. She was buying his company. Not tomorrow, not privately, not through negotiation. Right there in court. Daniel jumped from his seat, shouting that it was impossible, that she was lying, that his wife could never afford what he had built. But Claire finally looked at him with the calm expression of someone who had already won long before the fight began. Then she revealed the truth. She wasn't just the buyer. She was the bank. The silence that followed was brutal. Every person who had once laughed at Claire now stared at her like they were seeing her for the first time. Daniel's lawyers stopped speaking. His partners turned pale. Even the judge paused before continuing. But taking his company wasn't the part that left Daniel speechless. It was what Claire did next. She did not ask security to remove him. She did not demand an apology. She did not turn to the reporters with a victory speech, even though the flash of cameras had already begun exploding outside the glass doors of the courtroom. Claire simply stood, smoothed the front of her cream-colored suit, and walked toward the witness table where Daniel had left a silver pen beside his scattered documents. 12 years earlier, that same pen had been a wedding gift from her father. Daniel had laughed when he opened it. "What am I supposed to do with this?" he had asked, twirling it between his fingers. "Sign grocery lists." Her father, Edward Hawthorne, had smiled gently and said, "One day, you may need it to sign something important." Daniel had rolled his eyes after Edward left the room. "Your father has the personality of a locked filing cabinet." Claire had said nothing then. She had been 24, still believing love meant patience, still believing a husband's arrogance could be softened by loyalty, still believing that when a man said he was building a future for both of them, he meant both. Now in court, Claire picked up the pen and placed it in front of Daniel. "Sign the transfer authorization," she said quietly. Daniel stared at the pen as if it had become a weapon. His face had changed completely. The confident flush was gone. The charm he wore in boardrooms had cracked. In its place was the raw panic of a man who had built his throne on borrowed money and borrowed respect. "You set me up," he said. Claire's eyes did not move from his. "No, Daniel, I gave you 12 years to become the man you claimed to be." His jaw tightened. "You hid behind a bank. You hid behind me." That landed harder than any accusation in the courtroom. Because everyone knew it was true. They knew it in the way Daniel's first investors had come from Claire's family connections. They knew it in the way his earliest contracts had been secured after dinners Claire arranged, conversations Claire softened, and introductions Daniel later pretended were his own genius. They knew it in the way she had stood beside him at galas, silent and polished, while he told the same story again and again. "I started Mercer Dynamics in a garage," he loved to say. Claire always smiled at that part. It had not been a garage. It had been the carriage house behind her father's estate, rent-free for 18 months, while Daniel missed payment after payment to suppliers and called it strategic delay. Claire had balanced the books at midnight while he slept. Claire had called angry vendors in the morning. Claire had convinced her father not to pull his early investment after Daniel's first reckless expansion nearly buried the company before it learned to walk. But Daniel remembered only himself. Men like Daniel always did. The judge adjusted his glasses and reviewed the documents again. "Mr. Mercer, the default clause is valid. Your counsel had notice of this proceeding." Daniel turned sharply to his attorney. "Did you know about this?" His attorney, a gray-haired man named Fletcher, swallowed. "We were informed that Blackstone Vale Bank intended to exercise remedies if the settlement did not satisfy creditor obligations." "Blackstone Vale," Daniel snapped. "That bank was created by some offshore group." Claire's attorney, Miriam Shaw, lifted one page from the folder. "Blackstone Vale Holdings is majority-owned by Hawthorne Legacy Trust." Daniel's expression flickered. Hawthorne, Claire's maiden name. A murmur moved through the courtroom like wind through dry leaves. For the first time, Daniel looked at Claire as though she were not his wife, not his target, not the woman he had underestimated for more than a decade, but a stranger standing over the ruins of his life with keys in her hand. And in that second, Claire remembered the night everything inside her had changed. It was 7 years into their marriage. Rain had been tapping against the windows of their penthouse, and Daniel had come home drunk on applause after winning Business Innovator of the Year. Claire had been waiting at the dining table with a folder of reports. Mercer Dynamics was over-leveraged. Payroll was tight. A silent partner was threatening legal action. "Not tonight," Daniel had said, tossing his award onto the couch. "We need to discuss the bridge financing," Claire replied. He laughed. "Listen to you, bridge financing. Did you learn that from one of your little charity board lunches?" She had gone still. There were moments in a marriage when insult did not explode. It sank. It goes deep and quiet, like a stone dropped into dark water. Years later, the ripples arrive. That night after Daniel fell asleep, Claire opened her laptop. She searched through the old trust documents her father had left her before his sudden heart attack. Edward Hawthorne had not been a flashy man. He had owned banks, funds, real estate, logistics firms, and pieces of companies nobody knew he controlled. He had once told Claire, while she sat in his study at 16, "Real power doesn't need a loud entrance, it needs clean records." She had not understood then. She understood now. By dawn, Claire had called Miriam Shaw. By the end of that month, Blackstone Vale Bank had quietly purchased Daniel's most dangerous debt at a discount. 6 months later, it acquired another loan, then another. Daniel never asked why lenders who once threatened him suddenly became cooperative. He assumed they saw his brilliance. Claire let him. Not because she wanted revenge then. Because she wanted proof. She wanted to know whether, if given time and rescue and every possible chance, Daniel would become grateful, careful, honest, or kind. Instead, he became louder. He bought a yacht and named it Visionary. He appeared on magazine covers and talked about self-made discipline. He began staying out late with people who admired his money more than his character. He missed anniversaries, mocked her clothes, forgot her birthday twice, and once told a room full of executives, "Claire doesn't bother with business. She handles flowers and feelings." Nobody laughed louder than Daniel. Nobody noticed Claire's hand tightening around her glass. Except one man. Samuel Reed. Daniel's chief financial officer had been standing by the balcony doors that night. He was older, quiet, and painfully honest in the way people become when they have survived too many dishonest rooms. After the guests left, he found Claire in the kitchen, placing untouched dessert plates into the trash. "You understood every word of the debt restructuring call this morning," Samuel said. Claire looked at him. He lowered his voice. "You also knew the projections Daniel presented were impossible." For a moment, she considered denying it. Silence had become her safest dress. She wore it everywhere. Instead, she said, "Yes." Samuel nodded, as though a suspicion had finally found its answer. "He's going to hurt a lot of people if someone doesn't stop him," he said. That sentence followed Claire for years. It followed her when Daniel fired 200 workers before Christmas while approving bonuses for executives. It followed her when he blamed market conditions for losses caused by his own vanity projects. It followed her when he took out loans against assets that were already strained, then smiled for cameras at charity events. And it followed her into the divorce. Daniel filed first. Of course he did. He wanted the headline. He wanted control of the story. He wanted the world to believe he had outgrown the quiet wife who no longer matched his public image. His petition was cruel in the polished language of lawyers. He claimed Claire had contributed nothing to his business growth. He argued that most assets were separate. He requested that she vacate the penthouse within 30 days. The same penthouse purchased through a refinancing package Claire had approved through Blackstone Vale. When Miriam read the petition aloud in her office, she paused twice, not because she was surprised by Daniel's arrogance, but because even legal language could not hide contempt that deep. Claire sat across from her, legs crossed, hands folded. Miriam removed her reading glasses. "Do you want to destroy him?" Claire looked toward the window. The city below was silver with morning light. Somewhere in one of those towers, Daniel was probably rehearsing his wounded husband expression. "No," Claire said, "I want to reveal him." Miriam studied her for a long moment. "That may be worse." It was. Because Daniel had built a life where image was everything, he could survive debt. He could survive scandal. He could survive losing money, because men like him always found another room of people willing to believe confidence was competence. But exposure was different. Exposure stripped him of the only currency he had never borrowed. In the courtroom, Daniel finally took the pen. His fingers shook just enough for Claire to notice. "You won't get away with this," he said. Claire almost smiled. Not because the threat frightened her, but because he still thought this was something being done to him, not something he had signed, sealed, and invited through years of carelessness. "You're right," she said. "No one gets away with anything forever." He signed. The scratch of the pen seemed louder than thunder. A court officer took the document. Miriam reviewed it. Fletcher sat frozen. The judge made the ruling official with a voice that turned Daniel's empire into language and language into fact. Mercer Dynamics was no longer Daniel's company. It belonged to Claire. Outside the courtroom, reporters surged forward. "Mrs. Mercer, how long have you controlled Blackstone Vale? Were you planning this during the marriage? Is Daniel Mercer bankrupt? What happens to Mercer Dynamics now?" Daniel pushed through them with his head down, but cameras found him anyway. For years, he had trained himself to love cameras. He knew how to angle his jaw, when to smile, how to pause before answering so every sentence sounded expensive. That day, he had no sentence ready. Claire did. She stopped at the courthouse steps. The winter air lifted a strand of hair across her cheek. Behind her, the stone columns rose like something ancient and unsentimental. "I did not acquire Mercer Dynamics to punish one man," she said. "I acquired it to protect everyone he forgot was human." The reporters went silent. Claire continued. "By Monday morning, Every employee will receive written confirmation that their jobs are secure during the transition. Executive bonuses approved in the last quarter will be frozen pending review. Vendor debts under 90 days will be prioritized, and any employee laid off in the last 18 months due to manipulated projections will be offered a review for reinstatement or compensation. One reporter shouted, "And Daniel?" Claire looked straight into the nearest camera. Mr. Mercer will be treated exactly as he treated his obligations, according to the terms he agreed to. The clip went viral before sunset. By dawn, the world had chosen its headline. The wife he mocked OWNED the bank. Daniel saw it from a hotel room downtown because he had been advised not to return to the penthouse. Not legally barred, just advised. There is a particular humiliation in being told by your own lawyer that your presence makes everything worse. He sat on the edge of a bed that smelled like bleach and expensive soap, watching strangers dissect his life on television. A commentator called him reckless. A former employee called him cruel. An industry analyst called Claire's move the most elegant corporate reversal in recent memory. Daniel threw the remote at the wall. It cracked the screen, but the sound kept playing. She saved the company from him, someone said. Saved. The word burned. Because deep down, in a place Daniel had spent years burying under applause, he knew it was true. The first time Claire saved him, they had been 26. Mercer Dynamics had missed its first major delivery deadline, and Daniel had locked himself in the carriage house, raging at the staff. Claire found him standing over a desk covered in invoices. "We are finished," he said. She spent the night calling suppliers, negotiating partial shipments, and drafting letters Daniel signed the next morning as if he had written them himself. When the crisis passed, he took her out to dinner and said, "We make a good team." For one brief evening, Claire believed him. That memory returned to Daniel now, unwanted and sharp. Then another. Claire in a black dress at a fundraiser, gently correcting a senator's pronunciation of a foreign investor's name before Daniel embarrassed himself. Claire quietly sliding him a note during a meeting, "Don't promise 18%. Say 11-13% with phased expansion." Claire telling him not to trust Leland Price, the consultant who later vanished with $3 million. Claire. Everywhere he looked in the ruins of his success, her fingerprints were there. He had mistaken them for dust. On Monday morning, Claire entered Mercer Dynamics through the front lobby. Not the private executive garage Daniel always used, the lobby. Employees froze as she walked across the marble floor. Some had seen the news. Some had stayed up all night refreshing articles, wondering if they would have jobs by the end of the week. Many had met Claire only as Mrs. Mercer, the elegant woman at holiday parties who remembered spouses, names, and sent flowers when someone's parent died. Now she walked in as owner. Samuel Reed was waiting near the elevators. "You came early," he said. "I've been late for 12 years, Claire replied. He almost smiled. They rode up to the executive floor in silence. At the top, Daniel's portrait still hung opposite the boardroom entrance. It showed him leaning against a glass desk, arms crossed, expression confident. Beneath it, engraved in brushed steel, were the words, "Built from nothing." Claire stopped in front of it. Samuel followed her gaze. "I can have it removed," he said. "No," Claire answered. "Move it to the archive." "The archives?" "Yes, people should remember what happens when a company worships one man and ignores everyone holding it up." By 9 o'clock, the boardroom was full. Executives who had once barely acknowledged Claire now stood when she entered, not out of respect, not yet out of fear. Claire noticed everything: the nervous tapping of the chief legal officer's pen, the way the head of operations avoided Samuel's eyes, the empty chair at the far end where Daniel used to sit like a king bored by his own kingdom. She did not sit there. Instead, she chose the middle chair. That unsettled them more. "Good morning," she said. "I'll be direct. Mercer Dynamics has not been operating as a company, it has been operating as a stage set." No one spoke. "We have inflated projections, delayed payments, executive waste, and a culture of fear disguised as ambition. That ends today." The chief legal officer cleared his throat. "Mrs. Mercer, with respect. Transitions of this size usually require a longer assessment period." Claire opened a folder. 3 years ago, you signed off on a risk memo warning that Daniel's expansion into South American logistics lacked capital support. His face paled. "You marked it confidential and never presented it to the board." "I was advised." "By Daniel." Silence. Claire turned to the head of operations. "You reported workforce cuts as efficiency improvements, but internal documents show productivity dropped 18% after the layoffs." The woman looked down. One by one, Claire opened the drawers they thought were locked. She did not shout, that made it worse. Her calm gave every fact room to breathe. At the end of the table, Samuel placed a stack of sealed envelopes in front of her. Claire looked around the room. "Some of you will remain, some of you will not. The difference will be simple. If you protected the company, you have a future here. If you protected Daniel at the company's expense, your resignation terms are in front of you." The room seemed to lose oxygen. That afternoon, 12 executives resigned. By evening, 3 internal investigations had begun. By the end of the week, Daniel's name had been removed from the front page of the company website. But Claire was not finished. The next Friday, she visited the manufacturing floor. No cameras, no announcement. She wore flat shoes and a grey coat and walked beside Samuel through the West facility, where machines hummed and workers pretended not to stare. This was the part of the company Daniel rarely visited unless a photographer followed him. Claire stopped beside a woman inspecting turbine casings. "Maria Alvarez?" Claire asked. The woman's eyes widened. "Yes." Claire extended her hand. "You wrote a safety memo last year about the pressure seals." Maria hesitated, then shook her hand. "I did." It was ignored. Maria glanced at Samuel, then back at Claire. "Yes. My father used to say ignored warnings become expensive truths," Claire said. "I'd like you to lead the new safety review." Maria blinked. "Me. You saw the problem before the people paid to see it." Maria's expression shifted slowly, suspicion wrestling with hope. "Daniel said the review would slow production," she said. "Daniel is no longer here." The words moved through the floor faster than any official memo. "Daniel is no longer here." For hundreds of employees, it sounded like weather changing. That night, Claire returned to the penthouse for the first time since the trial. The rooms were immaculate, staged by decorators Daniel hired to impress people he did not like. Chrome, glass, white leather, art chosen because it was expensive enough to avoid questions. On the dining room wall hung their wedding photograph. Claire stood before it for a long time. In the picture, Daniel looked triumphant. Claire looked young, hopeful. Her father stood behind her, one hand on her shoulder, his eyes carrying something that looked like pride but might have been warning. Edward had never told her not to marry Daniel. He had only asked, the night before the wedding, "Does he see you clearly?" Claire had laughed then. "Of course he does." Her father had kissed her forehead. "Then make sure you never stop seeing yourself." She had not understood that warning until years later, when she realized disappearing inside a marriage could happen slowly enough to feel like devotion. Claire removed the wedding photo from the wall. Behind it was a faint rectangle where the paint had not faded. A ghost frame. She left the space empty. The next morning, Daniel came to the building. Security called upstairs. Mr. Mercer is in the lobby. Claire was reviewing employee compensation reports. Let him up. Samuel frowned. Are you sure? He's not dangerous, Claire said. He's desperate. There's a difference. Daniel arrived wearing yesterday's confidence poorly. His suit was wrinkled at the cuffs. His eyes were red. He looked around her office as if expecting to find his old furniture, his awards, his portrait. Claire had replaced almost everything. Only one item remained on the desk. The silver pen. Daniel saw it and stiffened. You're enjoying this, he said. Claire closed the report. No. You humiliated me in front of the entire city. You humiliated yourself in front of the entire city. I only brought documents. He laughed bitterly. You think that makes you better than me? No, she said. I think what I do now will decide that. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Daniel's voice dropped. What do you want? It was the first honest question he had asked her in years. Claire leaned back. I want the truth from you. He scoffed. The truth. Yes, no performance, no blame, no audience. Tell me when you started believing I was beneath you. Daniel's face tightened as if she had struck a place he did not know was bruised. That's ridiculous. Then this will be a short meeting. She reached for the phone. Wait. Claire stopped. Daniel looked toward the windows. The city shone behind him, indifferent and bright. I don't know, he said finally. Claire said nothing. He swallowed. Maybe when your father helped us. Maybe I hated needing it. Maybe every time you solved something, I told myself it didn't count because admitting it counted made me feel small. There it was. Not an apology, but a crack. Claire had spent years wanting that crack, wanting Daniel to look at himself and see even a fraction of the damage. Now that it was here, she felt no triumph, only a quiet sadness for the years wasted waiting for a man to become honest. You made me pay for your insecurity, she said. Daniel nodded once. His eyes shone, but he did not cry. Daniel had always considered tears a form of defeat. I want a role, he said. Consulting, advisory, anything. The company still needs my relationships. Claire almost admired the speed with which remorse became negotiation. No. His head snapped up. No. You will not work at Mercer Dynamics. I built it. You built the myth. Other people built the company. His mouth opened, then closed. Claire took an envelope from her desk and slid it toward him. What is this? He asked. A settlement offer. He opened it with visible suspicion. As he read, confusion crossed his face. You're giving me money. I'm buying your remaining claims, your trademarks tied to the Mercer name, and your agreement not to interfere with employees, vendors, or clients. This is less than I deserve. It is more than you earned. His hand tightened around the paper. Claire continued, there is also a condition. Daniel looked up. For every public statement you gave claiming you built the company alone, you will give one acknowledging the employees, early investors, and support systems you erased. He laughed once, sharp and humorless. You want me to confess? I want you to correct the record. And if I refuse? Claire's eyes moved to the pen. Then we proceed with creditor remedies, civil claims, and discovery. Every email, every memo, every false projection, every hidden account. Daniel looked down. The pen waited between them like a prophecy fulfilled. 3 days later, Daniel Mercer released a statement. It was stiff, lawyer-approved, and obviously painful. He acknowledged the contributions of many individuals previously under-recognized in the company's public history. He thanked employees. He thanked early supporters. He did not thank Claire. Not directly. But near the end, there was one sentence no one expected. Claire Hawthorne Mercer played a far greater role in the survival and growth of Mercer Dynamics than I publicly admitted. It was not enough to repair 12 years, but it was enough to make the world look again. Claire read the statement once, then forwarded it to Miriam with no comment. Miriam replied 2 minutes later. A clean cut. Claire stared at those 3 words for a long time. Because that was what it felt like. Not revenge, not victory. A cut. Clean, necessary, and still painful. Months passed. Mercer Dynamics changed slowly, then all at once. Claire renamed it Hawthorne Mercer Systems, not to erase Daniel completely, but to tell the truth of what had always been there. Employee retention rose, vendor lawsuits settled. The safety review Maria led uncovered flaws that could have become catastrophic within a year. The company's first honest quarterly report made investors nervous, then strangely loyal. Truth, Claire discovered, frightened people at first. Then it stabilized them. She moved out of the penthouse and into her father's old brownstone, the one with creaking stairs and a library that still smelled faintly of cedar. In the evenings, she sat at Edward's desk and read his old letters. Some were about business, some were about her mother, who had died when Claire was 13. Some were notes he had written to himself. One note, tucked inside a book on banking law, stopped her cold. Claire will inherit more than assets. Teach her judgment before control finds her. Claire touched the paper gently. Control had found her. Judgment was still becoming. 1 year after the courtroom acquisition, Claire hosted the company's annual meeting in the manufacturing facility instead of a hotel ballroom. The stage was simple. Employees sat in the front rows. Executives sat behind them. At the edge of the crowd stood Daniel. He had not been invited by Claire. He had been invited by Samuel, who believed closure sometimes required witnesses. Daniel looked different, less polished, less inflated. He had started a small consulting firm that did not carry his name. Rumor said he was difficult but quieter. Rumor also said he had begun paying old debts without being forced. Claire did not know whether that was growth or strategy. Maybe both. People were rarely only one thing. When Claire stepped on stage, applause rose, not the performative applause Daniel used to demand, but something warmer, steadier. She looked across the room and saw Maria in the front row, Samuel near the aisle, workers who had once feared layoffs, now wearing company badges with something like pride. Then she saw Daniel. For a brief second, the room disappeared. She remembered the carriage house, the wedding photo, the rain against the penthouse windows, the courtroom, the silver pen, her father's warning. Does he see you clearly? Daniel met her eyes. And for the first time, there was no smirk. No performance. No ownership. Only recognition. It came too late to save the marriage. Too late to recover the years. Too late to undo the public lies, the private wounds, the nights she had sat alone wondering whether silence was strength or surrender. But it came. Claire looked away first. Not because she was afraid. Because she was free. She began her speech with a sentence that would later be printed on the wall of the company's main lobby. No empire is built by one person, and no truth stays buried forever. The room erupted. Daniel did not clap at first. Then slowly, he did. And maybe that was what left him truly speechless in the end. Not that Claire had owned the bank. Not that she had bought his company in court. Not that she had exposed his debts, taken his title, or forced him to correct the lie he had lived inside. It was that after all of it, she did not become him. She did not rule through fear. She did not rewrite history to make herself the only hero. She did not crush everyone who had doubted her just because she finally could. She built something better from the wreckage he left behind. And Daniel, who had spent his life mistaking noise for power, finally understood the terrifying strength of a woman who never needed to shout. Dear viewers, this story is a reminder that underestimating someone because they are quiet can be the biggest mistake a person ever makes. Silence is not weakness, patience is not ignorance, and loyalty should never be mistaken for dependence. When people mock those who support them, erase their sacrifices, or build success on disrespect, the truth has a way of returning with interest. So value the people who stand beside you before life teaches you what they were worth after they are gone. If this story taught you anything, let it be this: never confuse kindness with helplessness, and never forget that the person you overlooked today may be the one holding the key to everything tomorrow.